History is written by the survivors. Yet some chapters are buried so deep that the fear they once carried slowly disappears from memory. One of those forgotten chapters begins in the summer of 1816. Imagine waking up in the middle of June, expecting warmth, expecting sunlight. Instead, the air feels like winter. The windows are frozen from the inside. Outside, the fields are covered in a thin layer of snow. This was not imagination. This was real. At first, the change was subtle. The spring of 1816 began like any other year. But as the weeks passed, something felt wrong. The air refused to warm. The wind carried a strange, unnatural cold that never left. In the northeastern United States, June did not bring life. It brought a sudden, violent snowstorm. Crops that had just begun to grow were buried under ice and frost within hours. Further north, in Canada, the cold became deadly. Birds froze in mid-flight and fell from the sky, lifeless, onto frozen fields. Even the sky itself had changed. The familiar blue was gone. In its place was a dim, copper-colored light, filtered through a thick haze that seemed to cover the entire world. People began to notice. And then they began to fear. The sun would rise, but it gave no warmth. The evenings arrived, but they brought no relief. It felt as if something invisible had taken control of the sky. Across the Atlantic, Europe was experiencing the same nightmare. In Switzerland, rain fell without end. Days turned grey, then darker, until even daylight felt like twilight. Travelers lost their way in the mountains, unable to see the sun above them. Without signs to explain what was happening, people searched for answers in fear. Churches filled with desperate crowds. Prayers echoed through cold stone walls. Many believed the end of the world had come. They believed the sun itself had been taken away as punishment. But the truth was not in the heavens. It was hidden deep within the earth. At the time, records described something they called a dry fog. A strange haze that dimmed the sunlight and turned the sky red, but brought no rain. In cities like London and Paris, the cold became unbearable. Even in the middle of summer, people burned furniture inside their homes just to stay warm. The physical damage was only the beginning. The psychological impact was far worse. This was an apocalypse without fire, without war, without warning. A silent collapse of the natural world. And as the frozen ground began to destroy entire harvests, humanity was about to face a far greater threat than the cold. Because when the crops fail, hunger begins. To understand the darkness of 1816, we must go back 1 year. Far from Europe and America, deep within the Indonesian archipelago, stood a massive volcano known as Mount Tambora. For centuries, it had remained silent. Local communities lived in its shadow, believing it to be a sacred mountain, a place where unseen forces rested beneath the earth. But in April of 1815, that silence ended. What followed was not a normal eruption. It was an event so powerful that it would reshape the entire planet. The explosion of Mount Tambora was unlike anything recorded in human history. The force released was greater than anything nature had produced in centuries. The sound of the eruption traveled across vast distances, echoing more than 2,000 kilometers away. Distant outposts mistook it for the sound of war, unaware that it came from a mountain tearing itself apart. Tambora did not simply erupt. It collapsed. The top of the mountain was violently destroyed, leaving behind a massive crater several kilometers wide. In that moment, unimaginable quantities of ash and rock were blasted into the sky. The eruption column rose higher and higher, reaching into the upper layers of the atmosphere. But the ash was only part of the story. The true impact came from something invisible. As Tambora erupted, it released enormous amounts of sulfur dioxide gas, high above the Earth. This gas transformed into microscopic particles known as sulfate aerosols. These particles spread across the atmosphere, forming a thin, reflective layer around the planet. This layer changed everything. Instead of allowing sunlight to reach the surface, it reflected a portion of the sun's energy back into space. Slowly, almost unnoticed at first, global temperatures began to drop. The balance of the climate shifted. Weather patterns changed. Seasons began to behave unpredictably. By the time this invisible veil spread across the globe, the damage had already begun. Near Tambora itself, entire communities were wiped out. Villages disappeared under ash and fire. Thousands lost their lives within hours. But the true scale of the disaster was only beginning to unfold, because this was no longer a local event. It was global. The eruption had triggered a chain reaction in the Earth's climate system. Ocean currents shifted. Winds carried the volcanic particles across continents. The atmosphere itself became altered. By the time 1816 arrived, the world was no longer the same. The planet had entered a state of cooling, trapped beneath a thin layer of volcanic haze. Humanity could not see it, could not understand it, but it was already changing everything. The beast had awakened, and its shadow was now stretching across the entire world. By the winter of 1817, the strange cold was no longer a mystery. It had become a global collapse. What began as an unusual summer had now evolved into a full-scale disaster. The event we now call the Year Without a Summer had already broken the fragile balance of human society. When the sun fails, everything else begins to follow. The first system to collapse was food. Across Europe and North America, crops failed on a massive scale. Fields that once promised life turned into cold, rotting ground. Harvests never came. What little survived was destroyed by frost or endless rain. In Ireland, the situation became desperate. The rain did not stop, and the cold refused to leave. Crops rotted where they stood. The potato fields, which sustained millions, turned into dark, lifeless soil. Hunger spread quickly, and with hunger came disease. Typhus moved through weakened populations, feeding on those already close to death. Entire families disappeared within weeks. Villages were left silent, marked only by shallow graves. Across the world, the same pattern repeated. In China, the monsoon rains failed. Rice paddies, which depended on precise seasonal cycles, became unusable. The land could no longer provide. Families were pushed to unimaginable decisions. Historical records describe people selling everything they owned for a small amount of grain. Some even sold their children in a desperate attempt to keep the rest of the family alive. As food disappeared, society began to fracture. In European cities, the price of bread rose beyond reach. What had once been a daily necessity became a luxury. The result was unrest. Crowds gathered in the streets. Anger replaced fear. Food storage sites were attacked. Grain warehouses were stormed. Governments struggled to maintain control. Historians would later call these events the bread or blood riots. In Switzerland, the crisis reached its peak. The government declared a national emergency as famine spread across the region. Reports described people collapsing along roads, too weak to continue. Some were seen eating grass. Others scraped moss from stones. Survival had replaced dignity. Even the systems that connected the world began to fail. At the time, transportation depended on horses. But with no food available, animals began to die. Wagons were abandoned. Trade slowed. Communication broke down. The world became isolated. A collection of struggling regions, each facing the same silent enemy. This was no longer just a climate event. It was a test of human endurance. Civilization itself was under pressure. And in this cold, grey world, where hope grew weaker each day, one question remained. How long could humanity survive without the sun? By the summer of 1816, the world had already been changed. Crops had failed. Societies had fractured. Millions had suffered in silence beneath a sky that no longer behaved as it should. But even in the darkest moments of history, something unexpected begins to form. In Switzerland, near the shores of Lake Geneva, a small group of riders found themselves trapped indoors. The weather refused to clear. Storms rolled across the lake day after day, and the sky remained locked in a permanent grey. Among them was a young woman named Mary Shelley. The constant thunder, the cold air, and the unnatural darkness created an atmosphere unlike anything they had experienced before. It felt as if the world itself had shifted into something unfamiliar. With little else to do, they began telling stories. Ghost stories. One night, a challenge was proposed. Each person would create the most terrifying story they could imagine. At first, Mary struggled to find inspiration, until one night, she had a vision. She later described it as a waking nightmare, a scientist standing beside a lifeless body. Through unnatural forces, the body began to move. From that moment, a story was born. Frankenstein, a tale about creation, power, and the consequences of pushing beyond natural limits. The darkness of 1816 had shaped the imagination behind it, but the influence of that year did not end with literature. Across Europe, artists began painting skies unlike anything seen before. Deep reds, burning oranges, strange, unnatural lights spreading across the horizon. One of those artists was J.M.W. Turner. His paintings captured something others could not fully understand at the time. Centuries later, scientists would study those works and discover something remarkable. The colors were real. They were the result of volcanic particles still present in the atmosphere, scattering sunlight across the sky. Even technology began to shift. With horses dying across Europe due to lack of food, transportation faced a crisis. In response, a German inventor named Carl Drey developed a new way to move without animals, a simple machine with 2 wheels, the earliest form of the bicycle. What began as a disaster had quietly reshaped multiple aspects of human civilization: art, literature, technology, and understanding. The eruption of Tambora proved something humanity had never fully realized before: that a single event, in a single place, could affect the entire planet. In 1816, the world had no explanation, no warning, no way to prepare. Today, we understand more, but the forces that shaped that year have not disappeared. The Earth still moves beneath our feet. The atmosphere still shifts above us. And somewhere, right now, another volcano waits, silent, unseen, until the moment it decides to wake again.